Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Women in Streaming Media Education podcast. Now, we are nearing the end of our first season of this podcast, and we hope that you've been enjoying this short content that aims to give you a little bit of insight into some of the trending topics in streaming media, presented by some of the amazing women working in this field. We've certainly enjoyed putting it all together, myself and my team that have put together the video, and the awesome Peggy who's been doing the blogs alongside this. So we really hope that you've been enjoying it too. Of course, we have done all of this as cheaply as we possibly can, for free, using the fantastic conferencing software that we've been using since COVID times. We would absolutely love to make this a little bit more fancy, a little bit more shiny moving forward, and we'd love to be able to get this going a little bit more, but we can't really do that without a bit of sponsorship. So if you've been enjoying this and you have some spare sponsorship in your budgets for this next year, do please get in touch with me, Polly, at womeninstreamingmedia.org, and I'd love to talk about how we can maybe make this podcast even bigger and better in the future. Back to today's episode. As usual, I'm very excited to be joined by someone from the industry in a new and exciting area. I'm not going to give you too much of this lady's background because we do talk about it in the podcast, and I think it's an interesting story, so I'm not going to spoil it. But Claire, who will be joining us today from DO, we'll be talking about audience technologies, and she'll be describing her background, which was not necessarily in the media, and how she got here, and the importance of how these technologies can be used to help us move forward with streaming media. So I will delay no more, on to today's podcast. So welcome to today's episode of the Women in Streaming Media Education podcast, and I'm really happy to be joined by Claire Smith from DO, who's going to be diving into the fascinating world of audience engagement and how this technology is transforming the way we understand viewer behaviour. Now, I always love to learn how somebody has ended up in their role. It's one of my favourite questions. But I think Claire has the most interesting story, and one that I don't think anybody else ever has had. So, Claire, could you tell us a little bit about your kind of background and how you ended up working in audience engagement technologies?
Yeah, so wow, what an intro. And firstly, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. You've been telling me lots about the other people who you've had on your podcast, and it's quite an honour to be included amongst some of those amazing women. So thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
So I guess a little bit about my career. I spent most of my career in sports. Which as a female wasn't always the easiest. So I spent most of my career at Liverpool Football Club. I was very lucky there. The managing director, Andy Hughes, he was really good at sort of spotting young talent, and understood particularly with the female young talent that we needed to be kind of nurtured and given those moments of exposure to senior audiences and all that sort of stuff. So he was fab, and of the sort of three girls that were in my pod, I guess, of people that joined at the same time, one of them is now CFO at LFC. One of them has gone on recently to be chief operating officer at the Jockey Club, who own all the major race courses across the country. Myself and a number of other people. So yeah, we were really lucky that he sort of took us on that journey through. So my role was head of strategy. So that involved understanding and creating the club's corporate strategy, so working with the board of directors to understand where the priority should be placed from a resourcing and investment perspective, and also with the ownership group sort of communicating to them what it is that the club was up to and what resources were required from a financial perspective. We were also a bit of an internal strategy team who were deployed out into the different business units, from broadcast to retail to stadium and various other things, so very broad range of experience, I guess, through there. And that's where I met Rick Curtis. So I actually employed Rick's agency. He was working for a digital agency called Think to come and help us with our sort of fan engagement strategy to understand how we could better connect with fans all around the world. he was massively impressive. I really loved the work that they did. We stayed friends and sort of always had a bit of a side joke on the train home from London on a Friday afternoon that we would start something of our own. And then in 2020, when I was on maternity leave, actually, during COVID, which is a whole other story, he came to me and said, I've got an idea and I'd love you to help me scope it out. He had a friend called Aid who was working in the movie industry making movies. And he sort of highlighted some of the research and work that he'd been provided with and said, look, there must be a better way to understand what audiences want and what they're responding to. So that's where Dio was born and how I sort of ended up as the managing director of Dio.
So I think when you explain it like that, it definitely makes sense. But if you were to just say you went from working at Liverpool Football Club to audience engagement technology, people would be like, what? So I think it's definitely a really interesting story. Thank you for sharing your journey. What is it then about audience engagement technologies that you find exciting? Obviously, when you came up with this idea, you were like, let's go for it. So there must have been some kind of spark that inspired you to go for it.
Yeah, so mostly it was just sort of understanding the way that things were currently done now blew my mind a little bit. And I don't want a whole industry to come at me here. There are people that are making waves and progressing things in the same way that as we are. But, when Aid described to me the types of processes they went through when understanding what audiences wanted and how they were responding to ultimately what they'd, poured their heart into crafting, the process kind of went, they went out into Leicester Square, grabbed some people who looked like the type of people that might like this movie, pulled them into a cinema, gave them a piece of paper, which just went, what? That pretty much asked quite rudimentary questions about whether you liked the movie or not. What did you think of the actor 1 to 10? And, multi-million-pound decisions about what to make, what to edit, how to market this creation were made off of that. And it's still happening. We still hear stories about major corporations who are spending hundreds of millions of pounds on creating movies who are running focus groups of 8 people. Like it just blows my mind a little bit. And thankfully every studio that we've spoken to has said this is amazing. We want to test this out. We want to do some stuff. We want to move it on a little bit. And there's this universal recognition that we need to change the way that audience feedback is collected and gathered. So that's what really excited me about it. And the guys had already got some stuff floating around in their head about how things could be different. And together we sort of have created what Dio is today, I guess. And I'm sure you're going to ask me a little bit about what that is.
It is mad, and perhaps why you can sometimes see that things don't go so well if this kind of interaction isn't happening ahead of the release of something. But I think one of the key things we spoke about when we had our catch up before was this ability now to measure kind of emotional response. Could you give us a little bit of a better understanding of how that kind of works and why that emotional response is actually so key?
Yeah, so I think you only need to do, a couple of minutes of Google searching to understand why focus groups don't work. You sit in a room with a small number of people. You've got some people with big personalities, big opinions. It's very easy to sway a group of people, and it's a very small sample. It doesn't represent, the population. So that's the first thing around the focus group approach. But the other thing is just purely making decisions based off of what people tell you. We all know that human nature, we're not always completely honest on surveys. We're not always completely honest in focus groups. People are complex beings, and we can't purely rely on one methodology. So the whole premise of Dio and where we were born from is we want to take multiple perspectives that include what people consciously tell us, which is sort of the traditional method, but also put that together with the subconscious signals from their body as well. So we've broadly got 3 buckets of feedback that we pull together. We do have surveys. Our questions are written by neuroscientists because there's a very fine art to asking a question in the right way to get a truthful response. Then we take emotional feedback. So this is primarily from the movements of the muscles in the face. So your face naturally, as you're watching something, as we're talking to each other, will be making small movements that indicate, how you're feeling inside. So we know if someone is, bored, if they're happy, what sort of level of happiness are they showing? Are they, immersed in the content and really sort of getting themselves into the world of the content, or are they sort of more of a passive viewer? We can understand a lot of that from the signals from the face, and also when we pair that, especially with our biometric data, that becomes really powerful. So our biometric data is gathered through wearable devices, sometimes something like this, sometimes a ring, sometimes a wristwatch. We'll use different things in different scenarios. So if we're in a cinema environment, it may be different than if we're looking at our audiences at home. And that will gather data such as your respiration rate, your heart rate. But one of the most telling signals we found when someone is watching entertainment content in particular is electrodermal activity, which is your skin's response. So, we all have those sort of skin prickling moments, the emotional moments in movies that make you have a bit of a, ooh. We can pick that up based off of the, the current that's flowing through the skin and your response, your sweat response. So when you put all of those different forms of feedback together, you get to the best source of the truth, because you're looking at conscious and subconscious signals from a number of different directions. And based off of the work we've done so far, we've really uncovered some really interesting stuff that, a survey alone or a focus group alone definitely wouldn't have surfaced. Moments in trailers where people have particularly responded to something that, if you'd have asked them about that, it wouldn't have shown up. So, one piece of content we worked on in the summer, there was a moment in the trailer where a young person was having a bit of an argument or being quite cheeky towards his parents. Not a major part of the trailer, but when we looked at the physiological response from young people, you get a huge spike. That's a moment that young people are really like, yeah, give it some. They're connecting with that moment, and it's not something that they talked about, in their open text responses. So yeah, it's been really interesting and most definitely revealing some interesting stuff.
I suppose, and maybe in that scenario, they're maybe not also aware necessarily of how that's making them feel, because your body's reaction, we're not always aware of it. I think we're getting better at that. I think there's lots of kind of movements in that way, but a lot of it's kind of subconscious, isn't it? So it sounds like what you're covering is a lot of the base of the what, what is somebody's reaction to it, but it also enables you to kind of pull out the why, I'm assuming, as well. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about the why, and then sort of what that can lead to in terms of content creation and of course advertising, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
So I mean, we come at that from a couple of different directions, I guess. So when we see an emotional response from someone in their data, we now have the capability to play that moment back to them and say, what is it at this particular moment that you were feeling? So we get a bit of context around that emotional response, because sometimes you see a physiological response and you need a bit more context and explanation around why that particular response has happened at that point in time. So we've built out the capability to get that extra layer of qualitative depth on the emotional response. But yes, like you say, sometimes it's completely subconscious, and until someone plays it back to you, you go, oh yeah, well that's because you don't really realize it off the top of your head. But the other sort of why, the big why that we've been discussing as a team, I guess, since we've started Dio, is there's so much data out there, particularly in streaming music, streaming content, but that data just tells you what people are watching. And that ultimately leads to this sort of cycle of repetitive formats of content. You get occasionally things that break through that are really interesting, but it almost happens by accident. Squid Game, that sort of thing, Stranger Things, based off of the data that people have. It's surprising that those types of content, get made, because ultimately when people are creating content, they look at what's worked before. And that is not the best way to do it for audiences, because you're not getting that diversity of storytelling. It's not great for the people that are making the content, especially those indie producers that are creating amazing stuff that they can't get out there into the world because they haven't got any comps. We can't, we don't really know what the genre is, and we don't really know the actors, so we can't compare it to what's gone before. Therefore, we can't commission it because there's too much risk. What we're doing is de-risking that process, meaning that people are getting a much more varied and rich content experience, and stories are getting out there that maybe wouldn't have done before. We've seen real life examples of this. We've anecdotally heard from the industry that things like Stranger Things, on paper, child cast, 80s, weird storyline, let's face it, very little to compare it to that's gone before. It must have been a real struggle for them to get the marketing budget behind that, to get it pushed out into the world. And potentially, if they'd had something available to test that on before they got to that point, they'd have been able to push it much harder, much sooner, and it wouldn't have had that sort of slow burn and slow explosion that it sort of ultimately got to. So we're hoping that our technology will really help people get the work that deserves to be out there, and the stories that deserve to be out there into the world, with the evidence points behind it of what people really think.
So two things. I love that Stranger Things anecdote, because I think I came to that a little bit later than other people, but I was into it straight away. So I was that tick box, love nostalgia. Yeah, give me all the nostalgia, which was obviously something that people didn't predict. They didn't think people would be so into nostalgic content. But like you say, now what we've actually seen is a whole run of everything is now nostalgia, and now people are getting bored of it being a bit nostalgic. So that kind of actually, what is it that people want to watch is so important. And then the other thing that I really liked what you just said, which I hadn't actually thought about, I don't think we kind of touched on it before now, was that indie content, people breaking through, being able to do that easier because their content can be shown as what people want to watch. And I think that would be an amazing thing, thinking about people I know that are kind of indie filmmakers that they've been doing it for a long time. I know what they're making is good, but how do they get that break? So that's a really exciting prospect.
And that bit's so important to us, and we're looking to work sort of on a pro bono basis with indie producers who are doing great things, first time female directors and diverse cast and crew. We really want to showcase that work as part of what we do to elevate stories like that and movies like that, the amazing content out there that's struggling to get out into the world.
I love it. That's very exciting. Okay, so talking a bit back to the technology then, as that's advancing, obviously all the things that you discussed there, and I love that you've got one of those rings, they fascinate me. It's all evolving, and kind of how you're using it is evolving. What do you kind of think, future facing, bit of a prediction, that we can expect this kind of change for? How will it affect the content creators? And then the kind of side part of that, the advertisers, because obviously now the way that we consume content is different. Advertising is changing hugely as well, and that's all kind of adapting. So where do you kind of see this being useful for that?
So in terms of future technology, I guess I can only talk about the things we have planned on our roadmap. We're launching in the US, and we'll look to roll out into other European markets as well. One of the things that we have realised since talking to studios that they're finding particularly useful is showing foreign language content in the UK audiences or US audiences, to understand if there's any potential in the content that sort of lives out there but is not in English. I think that's obviously driven off the back of the success of things like Squid Game. So very soon also we'll have our at-home audiences hooked up to, sounds really invasive, doesn't it, hooked up, but rigged up, I guess, equipped with biometric technologies. That's the best, isn't it? So we'll have, at-home audiences, biometric data being captured and collected as well. In the future, we see, we talk about things like potentially, people are just wearing these devices and we're gathering their data and understanding what they're watching automatically. Like that's the dream. But in terms of the way that it's used, we obviously hope that it's going to fly in an entertainment space. We also work in advertising as well. We work in gaming, we work in music and podcasts and all sorts of things. So we can test, any content with audiences. From an advertising point of view, the intersection between advertising and content is really interesting, especially at the moment, because if we really truly understand the audiences for the ads, we really truly understand the audiences for the content, it's very easy then to connect the two and make that advertising much more effective, because you have that really great match between the content and the sponsors of the content or the advertisers around the content. So that for us is something that we really want to explore some more.
Yeah, I think, we've all experienced that advertising of things that we don't necessarily want. So it just totally makes sense to get that data correct. And I can really, really see how that's going to evolve as the way that we're consuming content evolves as well. That is all we have time for.
Wow.
That went really fast. Really gone fast. Yeah, I think we could keep talking, but that would ruin my keeping it short. So thank you so much, Claire, for shedding the light on how useful audience engagement technology is, but also kind of the difference it will make moving forward. It's really, really interesting to hear about that. So thank you for coming on and talking about this with us.
No, thank you very much.